We have an exciting show planned for you today. Football scheduling, talk, and recruiting updates coming up here shortly. Let's get right on into it.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton. I serve as a credentialed media member for Cardinal Sports Zone. I also do some PA announcing work for the university in various sports. I want to take this time to thank you, as I always do, for making us your first listen of the day. I truly appreciate it. And just a reminder, the show is free on all streaming services, including YouTube, 5 days a week, your team every day. A lot of different variety of topics on the docket for this Tuesday edition of the show. We're going to start out discussing why the first half or the first 6 games of the Louisville football schedule are critical to the overall level of success this season. We will then transition over into the recruiting realm where 2023 4-star defensive back prospect Shawn Russ Jr. included the Cardinals in his final 3 list cut. And then in the last segment, we will discuss the Cardinals basketball program and Kenny Payne offering 4-star 2023 prospect Dailyn Swain. So before we get started, I do want to apologize if there are any technical difficulties on my end. I've had some people reach out to me and give me some feedback that there were some video audio issues that they weren't necessarily matching up right. So I do apologize. I've had some issues with my connection and Wi-Fi and things of that nature, which if you've been following along with the show, heading into spring, obviously things were a little rough in terms of Wi-Fi. So hopefully no more issues. Hopefully we have that resolved, but I do apologize if you are experiencing those. So yeah, let's get right on into it. In terms of the football schedule, and I want to go ahead and say this for the record so it doesn't get misinterpreted, so it doesn't get misconstrued, and I hate that I have to come out and state the obvious, but I'm not saying that if the Louisville Cardinals struggle in the first part of the season, that the season is over and there's no way to resurrect the season or anything like that. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying in general is the fact that the first 6 games of the schedule for the Louisville Cardinals offered the opportunity to basically gauge how much success that this team is going to have. The first part of the schedule is admittedly, collectively, easier than the last 6 games of the schedule. The top 3 projected teams in the ACC Coastal Division, the Atlantic Division, are in the back half of the schedule, along with Pittsburgh, who is a team that is going to be in the running for the coastal part. Then you have Kentucky, who the Cardinals have struggled with, and then James Madison, which should be a victory for the Cardinals. But regardless, the first 6 games, they're important for a couple of different reasons. And obviously you're thinking, Dalton, oh, well, of course they're important. They're in the first 6 games. I mean, you want to get started out well, but when you really break it down, the opportunity is there for Louisville to go 5-1, 6-0 in the first half of the schedule. A lot of media and fans have the Cardinals slated anywhere from about 6 wins on up to 8 wins, maybe 9 wins if you're feeling a little optimistic, but definitely in that 6 to 8 range is probably where the most of the consensus falls in terms of where you're on how many wins you're projecting Louisville to have. So the first 6 games, I think it's collectively easier to, get 5 to 6 wins at the beginning and look to, win 1 to 2, maybe 3 of the last 6 games, then maybe struggle and go like 4-2 and have to win 2 of those games to get bowl eligible, or 3 to try to get to 7 wins. So, for lack of better terms, as common sense would seem, that you want to take advantage of the easier part of the schedule. But so let's just look at that. As I mentioned, the last half of the schedule is extremely tough for the Louisville Cardinals. You have Pittsburgh and Wake Forest at home. Look, I understand, and I'm not saying that Louisville is going to lose the majority of these games. I'm just saying that they're significantly tougher. 3 of the teams are projected to finish in the top of the ACC Atlantic Division ahead of Scott Satterfield's Louisville Cardinals. Yes, The Cardinals had a fourth quarter lead against all three of those teams last year, but you're going up against a Clemson team that's likely going to improve more. You're playing them in Death Valley. You have both Wake Forest and NC State at home, but they have a lot of guys returning just like you do. So as last year showed, it's kind of a 50-50 toss-up, and you have to think that Louisville should have a good chance at winning both of those games, or maybe at least one of those two games. But they're still going to be tough opponents, along with the Pittsburgh Panthers, who, sure, if you want to take things considering that, hey, no more Kenny Pickett, no more Jordan Addison, you're having to use a new offensive coordinator, replacing some guys in that offense. Look, they still return a very solid defense, a good offensive line. They've got talented guys out wide, and Keaton Slovis is definitely he's definitely more than a average replacement for Kenny Pickett. So, and then Pat Narduzzi is one of the best defensive coaches in the conference, in my opinion. They always play extremely hard, and the effort is there on both ends of the ball every single play, kind of like Wake Forest with Dave Clawson as well. So the 4 ACC games that you have, I mean, you're going up arguably against the top 4 teams that you'll play in the conference in the last 6 games, and then not to mention Kentucky, who the Cardinals have struggled with since Scott Satterfield took over, and even before then. So until the Cardinals show that they can truly compete with the Wildcats, it's going to be hard to predict a victory there. Now, obviously, look, I do get it. Yes, you have James Madison at the end of the schedule, but I mean, James Madison could end up being a trip-up game. I'm not going to sit here and say that, they're a big factor into why that this is the toughest stretch of the season. But needless to say, obviously from a counting wins, if you're trying to see where the wins are coming from for Louisville, a lot of those are going to come in the first part of the season, but also I want to bring this to the conversation. Yes, you can take this argument as, okay, sure, it's all about counting wins. Yes, I get it. But also, you can't underestimate building that momentum and building it up, because it helps team morale. It takes away or decreases the chances of going on a skid, because your confidence is building up and things of that nature. But overall, and it helps with recruiting wise too, because if you win a good amount of those games, there's a chance you could get ranked. Look, there are a lot of prospects on this 2023 in this 2023 recruiting cycle that have already committed to Louisville or are considering Louisville. I'm not saying that the Cardinals losing a good amount of games early on is going to sway their decisions and make them decommit or even cut the Cardinals from their list, but I'm saying it cannot hurt in the recruiting realm if the Louisville Cardinals are able to build the wins early on. And I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but I mean, if you're sitting at 5-1 at 6-0 after the first 6 games, and let's say that one loss is to Central Florida, who's, hey, look, when Jacob Lane came on to the podcast a couple weeks ago, I said, for the record, I thought Central Florida was the number 1 trap game for the Cardinals because it's getting overlooked a little bit. When you talk about the toughest games on the schedule, nobody's talking about Central Florida. They're talking about the usual suspects: NC State, Clemson, Kentucky, Wake Forest, so on and so forth, Pittsburgh. But not many people are talking about Central Florida. Look, this is a true road game down in Orlando against a team that's very well coached by Gus Malzahn. They came into Cardinal Stadium last year. Yes, they don't necessarily have Dylan Gabriel, but they do have a solid roster down in Orlando, and there's a lot of solid players on that team. They've utilized the transfer portal really well, so it's going to be a tough game. Let's say that the one loss comes to Central Florida, and you were a perfect 3-0 in the conference, or 4-0 in the conference, because you've beaten Syracuse, Florida State, Boston College, and Virginia. Hey, I'm not saying that an ACC championship berth is on the line, but you've got Pittsburgh, you've got Clemson, you've got Wake Forest, and you've got NC State. 3 of those teams last year you held a lead against going into the fourth quarter. So obviously, this is big from a momentum standpoint. It's big from a counting wins perspective. And if you're looking on possibly trying to compete for the ACC, then you have to beat teams like Florida State and Virginia, who are Florida State and Boston College, who both of those teams are kind of predicted to be behind you in the ACC Atlantic Division. Virginia's a team that, look, yes, Brendan Armstrong's coming back, but they are replacing pretty much their whole offensive line, defensive production they're having to replace from a awful defense from last year. Some more skill personnel. They do return some of their receivers, but you have a new head coach. You have some guys transferring out of that defense. Virginia should be a win. These games to where, you're going up to Boston, you're going to Charlottesville. These are games that you really can help you build your momentum, especially, the first 6 games. If you start this season out 6-0, obviously it's best case scenario, right? But I'm just, posing the question, and this might seem like me spewing common sense, like, okay, Dalton, sure, they finished the first half of the schedule lossless, and they lossless. I'm not even sure if that's a word, probably not, but we're creating it. If they finished the first half of the schedule 6-0, then it's a lot easier to start counting those wins, and you're looking to maybe reach that next level. And it's critical in the first half of the schedule because there's no more moral victories. There's no more, we almost won those games. There's been 2 years of that. This is about wins and losses. This year is about getting those results. You have the team to do it. You have a lot of veterans that came back from last year's team. Kendrick Duncan Jr. is back. Malik Cunningham is back. You have your running back core has improved. You've got some talented wide receivers. Marshawn Ford is back. A good amount of your offensive line. A good amount of your defensive line. You brought in Jermaine Lole, Keitrell Clark, Chandler Jones. A lot of defensive back transfers. Yasir Abdullah, Momo Sanogo, the list goes on. Monty Montgomery is back healthy now. This is the year that results need to happen. It has to start early on in the season because the schedule does get challenging toward the end of the year. So that's all I'm saying is that the first half of the schedule, although it doesn't define how good this team will be, it is going to be a huge gauge to tell us how successful this team will be by the end of the year, even more so than years prior. So let's take a minute now to transition a little bit more into the recruiting aspect of things, where the Cardinals were sort of unexpectedly added into the final 3 of a top 2023 defensive backs list cut. We will discuss that here in just a second after we talk about our friends over at LinkedIn. As you gear up for fall, you need the right people on your team to help your small business fire on all cylinders. LinkedIn Jobs is here to make it easier to find the people you want to talk to faster and for free. Being a part of a family-owned business, I've seen other family-owned businesses utilize LinkedIn to hire some very qualified and talented individuals. Some of those are my friends, and they're very, very happy that they utilize LinkedIn. So it works both ways. I've seen both sides of the table. It is home to the largest professional network of over 810 million people. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find candidates you want to talk to faster. Did you know that every week, nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. On Monday evening, Shawn Russ Jr., a 2023 4-star defensive back, cut his list to 3, and the Louisville Cardinals were included alongside the likes of the Florida State Seminoles and the Michigan Wolverines, which essentially eliminated the Kentucky Wildcats and the South Carolina Gamecocks. For me, I remember when the Cardinals offered Shawn Russ back, I think it was last summer, because I remember thinking, oh, wow, they're really trying to get some big name, some highly rated prospects in this class. This was before, obviously, all of this huge momentum. I remember when they offered him, didn't necessarily know how involved the Cardinals were going to be able to get. Usually with these types of prospects, especially from Florida, it's going to be challenging there's a fly flying around. It's absolutely making me angry. I do apologize. But needless to say, I didn't know how serious the Cardinals were going to get in his recruitment. The one-time Florida decommitted in, I believe it was the winter of 2021, the early months of 2021. And now the Cardinals are right into the mix. According to some social media posts, it looks like that Russ was ranked a little bit higher in years past and has kind of fell down the rankings a little bit. Obviously, I don't know too much about that. He's currently ranked as the 389th best prospect in the 2023 cycle. He's listed as a safety in the 24/7 Sports Composite, but he's listed as the 36th best safety, but he's listed as a cornerback as well. So I wonder what his role is going to look like at the next level. 6'2", 185 pounds from Fort Myers, Florida, product of Dunbar High School. If I do remember correctly, he was teammates with current Cardinal commitment Jordan Church, who is now at IMG Academy. Needless to say, I was kind of surprised because Louisville fans in kind of the recruiting talks, Shawn Russ's name really hasn't been discussed all that much when it comes to the Louisville Cardinals. So obviously, you're not complaining when a top 400 player includes you in your list cut. From what people have sent me, it seems like those maybe on the Michigan side and maybe the Florida State side are kind of in the same boat, to where it's like we hadn't necessarily heard much. In regards to Shawn Russ, a lot of people think that Louisville might be the favorite here, but no inside information to really to confirm that. Look, I'm not one to fuel speculation. Apparently, according to some screenshots I've seen from like message boards that people have sent me, there might be like some like grades or off the field issues. Look, I'm not going to address those because I don't know. I'm not going to entertain them. I'm not going to suggest that that's why we haven't heard more about him. I obviously don't know, but I'm not going to fuel speculation about these prospects. So we're going to talk about this strictly from a football aspect. Obviously, when you lose Martell Height and Jeremiah Collins, this would be a solid addition on the field for the Cardinals. Being listed as both a cornerback and a safety with his 6'2" frame leads me to believe that it's kind of maybe a to be determined situation in terms of what he would play at the next level. I'm not sure if Louisville has a specific viewpoint of whether he's going to be like a boundary cornerback or if he's going to be a strong safety or something along that lines. Maybe he fits into like the Ben Perry area, to where you're utilizing a bigger defensive back and kind of an outside linebacker hybrid Isaiah Simmons type of role. But I love the tenacity that Russ plays with. Obviously 6'2", a good size for a defensive back, has athleticism and is a two-way player. So plays on the offensive side, so has good hands. I'm going to read you a little bit from his excerpt. Also plays basketball, has participated in trophies with the Florida Vipers on the AAU circuit. Played both offense and defense for a Dunbar program that went 9-1 and won a district title in the Sunshine State's 6A classification. Had 32 tackles and 3 interceptions. Also caught 20 passes for 304 yards and 3 touchdowns. Named to the Big 15 of the News Press at the beginning of the season. Two-way player back in 2020 and got snaps at both cornerback and safety in 2019. So he's a guy that is kind of utilized all over the field. And I believe he's also a big-time player in special teams, playing both ways in the return game and defensively. So that versatility is something that Scott Satterfield, Brian Brown, and Wesley McGriff continue to preach as being a very, very valuable skill set to have, a very valuable thing to have, being able to play him in multiple positions. So obviously I think that this makes sense for Louisville from a couple of different perspectives, because if you look at him as a cornerback, well, hey, look, the Cardinals could be losing Catrell Clark, Chandler Jones, and some other players to the draft, or maybe even transfer. And then safety wise, Kendrick Duncan Jr. is going to be gone. Who knows in terms of MJ Griffin, Josh Minkins, if those guys have big seasons, whether or not they could transfer out. And there's some various other guys who could end up, or not transfer out, but maybe go to the draft when it comes to MJ Griffin and Josh Minkins, and then maybe some other players look to transfer out due to lack of playing time. So having the opportunity to play him at either cornerback or safety would be huge for the Louisville Cardinals. I guess now the objective would be, if the Cardinals are truly prioritizing him, which it would be hard to believe that they weren't, assuming that they are in this top 3. The goal would probably be to get him on an official visit this winter or this fall, to have him come to a game day atmosphere and things of that nature. So obviously some big news, unexpected in its nature, but still some very big news for the Louisville football program in terms of recruiting. Shawn Russ Jr. is very, very talented and would be a welcomed addition to the Louisville secondary. So with the final segment of the show, I want to transition over into the basketball recruiting side of things, where Kenny Payne has made a new offer out to a 2023 four-star, yet he already has a top 5 that was released here soon, or recently, I should say. We're going to talk about that here in just a second. If you're listening to this on certain streaming services, if you're watching this on YouTube, you're not going to hear the audio implemented advertisements. So if you do hear them, just stay tuned. If you don't, just keep that in mind. But as always, I want to take this time to thank you all for making Locked On Louisville your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. 2023 four-star prospect Dailyn Swain, a 6'6" small forward from Columbus, Ohio, was recently offered by the Louisville Cardinals over, I think, the past 48 hours or so. A talented prospect, ranked inside of the top 75 in the class. The only thing is, earlier this month, the talented four-star prospect released his top 5, with Arizona State, Arkansas, Clemson, Xavier, and Ohio State making the list. So the question now becomes, well, can the Cardinals rain on the party? Can they disrupt the decision-making of Dailyn Swain and try to get him either to reconsider or at least give them a fair chance to recruit him? The 6'6", 170-pound guard/forward combo is ranked as the 75th best player in the class according to the 24/7 Sports Composite, the 15th best small forward, and the 3rd best in the state of Ohio. It seems like Ohio State is probably the leader at this point. Being from Columbus, obviously the geographical aspect of that is going to be tough to overcome. The Columbus Afrocentric early college high school product is friends, and I think AAU teammates, if I'm not mistaken, with former Christian Academy of Louisville guard and current Ohio State commitment George Washington III, who, if you are not aware, I think he moved up to the Buckeye State to play his remainder of his high school basketball. His father, George Washington, is an assistant coach at Dayton. So he will be up in Ohio, no longer in the city of Louisville. So this is going to be a tough recruitment to get into, in my opinion, because I think this is probably going to be a tough one to take from Ohio State. He has a good relationship with Chris Holtman and Jake Diebler. This past year, he was the Ohio Division III Player of the Year, averaging 20.8 points per game, 7.8 rebounds, 5.2 assists, 3 blocks, and 2.9 steals. That is incredible all across the board. When you watch his film, it's pretty straightforward that he's a guy that affects all aspects of the game. He has an official visit scheduled with Xavier coming up this month, Ohio State early in September. And if Louisville can end up possibly getting a visit, I think that they might be able to get into this recruitment. But like I said, it's going to be tough to take him out of the state of Ohio. A long 6'6", prospect that can play as either a 2 or a 3, very versatile, good defender, crashes the boards well, is unselfish with the basketball, defends and gets out well in transition, and can shoot the ball well, which is kind of seemingly, the MO of Kenny Payne's recruiting in terms of defense and transition, and obviously shooting the basketball. So, and an unselfish player in nature as well. When you look at those assist numbers. So kind of a guy that is a Swiss Army knife type of player. I think that offensively he's still developing and, refining that skill set. The dribbling aspect of it makes me or leads me to believe that he's going to be able to be solid at creating his own shot at the next level. But does a good job with his length and with his size to utilize mismatches with smaller high school players. But a very, very good player on both ends of the court. So it's hard to see how involved Louisville is going to get with this one or how far they're going to get. I know that Kenny Payne has been rumored to be a guy that doesn't necessarily just hand out offers for the sake of offering someone. It has to be serious. Swain seems like a player that might rise in the rankings, maybe crack into the top 50 by this time next year. But overall, I am interested to see if Louisville can secure a visit, because that's going to be the telltale sign. If they can do that, then they have a fair chance. But even if they do, in fact, get a visit, I still think it's going to be tough to take him away from the state of Ohio. But we will see how things go. So for all of your conference news, check out Locked On ACC, hosted by Candace Cooper. We will be back here tomorrow. Thanks again, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, free on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. Everyone have a great rest of your Tuesday. Stay cool, and we will see you right back here